Well, let me just talk a little bit about my background. I'm a Hmong descent. There has been, not anymore, but there has been a misconception that Hmong were from Mongolia. And so I grew up educating my friends and my peers and the other different ethnic around me of my identity and where I came from. So Hmong are not from Mongolia. Hmong are from Southeast Asia, the majority of Hmong in America are from this landlocked country in Southeast Asia known as Laos today. And the Hmong were involved in a secret operation or secret war in the 20th century. It was one of the largest CIA covert operation in that part of the century. And we just happened to be in the middle of the superpowers playing a chess game in that part of the world. And so the outcome of that secret war, which is a part of the Vietnam War, turned out that many of us had to leave our homeland and we had to take refuge, and then that's how we got dispersed all around the world. And most of the Hmong that fled Laos end up in the United States because of our involvement during the war. Others have touched a little bit on the secret war, but I just like to briefly talk about the Hmong history as part of the secret war. The Hmong were originally from southern China. Around the mid-1700s, the Hmong start migrating south from southern China into what is known as Southeast Asia. The Hmong had been persecuted by the Chinese, and many of our ancestors tried to resist and fight back, while others were pushed south and end up in North Vietnam, northern Laos, northern Thailand, and small number in northern Burma. What happened then was the Hmong settled in remote areas in the northern part of these countries. They remain up in the mountain. Hmong means free, and we want to be free. We don't want to be disturbed by anybody. We are a very independent people, and we just want to be left alone. And so basically there are a common law, but within ourselves, and we do have respect for other group of people, but we don't want to be controlled by anybody. And so wanting our freedom and our independence is all that we wanted back then. What happened was, in the mid-1800s, the French came into Southeast Asia. At that time, they call it the Indochina, and the French colonized part of that region. So Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were part of the French colonization known as Indochina. The Hmong went through a lot of troubles with the French due to the high taxation that the French imposed because it's their territory. And so now a group of people that have their freedom undisturbed by the lowland Lao, now they had to pay tax, now they had to follow the French rule. What that led to was a whole conflict with the French. Now it also gave an opportunity for the Hmong to start integrating, start coming down the mountain to live in the city. And so it caused some tension, but it also caused some improvement and advancement of the Hmong way of living. And until all this time, when the French were there, we didn't have a written language. The Hmong did not have a written language until the 1950s, when a priest, a Catholic priest, from France that was in Laos. He was the one that put together this written language for the Hmong. The Hmong had a language, it's a monotone language, but because of our war experience in China, basically our record were wiped out. So anything it has to do with the Chinese had the mission to destroy the Hmong to the root. And that's why it caused the mass exodus out of China. And so now the Hmong language was lost. The written language was lost. And so what this priest did was he was able to use the modern day Roman characters and put together a written language for the Hmong around the 1950s. When the French lost the war to the North Vietnamese at Dien Bien Phu, the French finally declared Laos its independence. And that's when the Hmong were then start coming in to take on role with the Lao government. Now during the French time, the Hmong also played a significant role for the French, helping the French fighting against the North Vietnamese. And so the French honor and acknowledge the Hmong's contribution in saving their soldiers when they were defeated at Dien Bien Phu. So this gave a recognition to what the Hmong have done for the French. When the French left Laos, the Hmong were integrated into Laos. And so from that point on, during the French era, then rose a young man who later, when the American came, became a leader that lead the Hmong people. And so this young man started his career with the French as a messenger and became an army. He was the first officer in the French army. Everybody else were volunteers. So he was the first officer in the French army that built his reputation and built the Hmong reputation. And then when at the exit of the French, the United States government have an interest in Southeast Asia. So the United States came in, and unfortunately the war broke out. And what that war broke out was, it involves the interest. Laos was supposed to be a neutral country, and it brought external power, where the United States went in to support the official Lao government. But then there's also another faction to that, was the communists. And the communists was supported by North Vietnam, China, and the Soviet Union. So it was almost like a World War III conflict in Laos, in this landlocked neutral Laos. The United States specifically wanted someone to stand up against communism. And I believe others have talked about how the CIA went in and contacted this young officer in the Lao Army named Vang Pao. I like to backtrack a little bit and describe that incident, as I have personal interview with the CIA individual who were there at the time. This CIA individual's name is James William Lair, or commonly known as Bill Lair. And he was specifically sent to Thailand to teach guerrilla warfare, because the United States knew exactly that eventually communism is going to come down, with the Eisenhower belief was the domino theory, that these little countries or little group of people would not stand a chance against a well-trained army invading their territory. So Bill Lair went to Thailand, and he started a program called the Paru. And what that program did was specifically train the Thais to gather information about communist coming activities. But he could only expand that program within the Thai borders. He couldn't go to other countries. When the Civil War of Laos broke out in the summer of 1960. It gave Bill Lair the opportunity to expand that program. Now, Bill Lair knew about Vang Pao through the Peru program, through the Hmong in Thailand. So Vang Pao already had a reputation. But at the same time, Vang Pao's reputation was all built from the French era. And so when the Civil War broke out, Bill Lair went in and finally was able to get in contact with Vang Pao. And that's when the alliance started between Thailand, Laos, and the United States to deter communism. So that's how the Hmong got involved, and that's how the whole Secret War started. So with the alliance joined in 1961, actually at the start of 1961, when Bill Lair and the Thai Peru, one of them, the head of the Thai Peru was Colonel Pranet. They came into Laos looking for Vang Pao and finally found Vang Pao, and they came to the agreement that they would join alliance and stand against communism. And what Bill Lair asked Vang Pao was, what are you going to do now that the communists have already taken over the PDJ in all northern Laos? And Vang Pao said that this is our home. We either resist and fight the communists and fight them off our land, or we run to the south and go to Thailand. But if you would give us the weapon, I have the men to fight. And that's exactly what the CIA wanted. The Peru program, that's what they wanted to do. That's what Thailand wanted to do. Thailand does not want the communists to reach its border. So they will do anything to stall the communists from reaching their border. And so that's how this alliance started. So first, they funded 1,000 men, armed 1,000 men, to see how the Hmong would stand up against the communists. And in that very first 1,000 men armed, they only give 3 days training. It's a 3 days training program for these people to fight against the communist troops. And for the Hmong, the reason that Bill Lair and the Peru chose the Hmong was the Hmong are natural to the jungle, and they're also natural fighters. And when they can go into the jungle and just blend in the jungle, and they can climb the steep mountain straight up, that's what Bill Lair and the Peru wants. And so with this three-day training program, Thailand sent in the Peru to train the Hmong in Laos. And that's how the Secret War started. Eventually, it came down to Long Cheng. The United States backed up a little bit. By 1962, the Geneva Accord was signed, declaring Laos to be neutral and for all foreign troops to withdraw from Laos, meaning the North Vietnamese troops has to leave Laos. The United States has to pull all of its CIA and military personnel out of Laos. The United States did withdraw from Laos, except they left 2 CIA agents out in the field with the Hmong to observe to make sure that the Vietnamese withdraw its troop. The North Vietnamese did not withdraw its troop. And so with that violation, then everything has to conduct covertly. The North Vietnamese know that the United States were in there, and vice versa. And they need a central location to start this secret operation. So the United States went in and started building this secret base known as Long Cheng. Long Cheng is initially a small Lao Tuong village. And when the Hmong went in there, and the CIA went in there, it was built up from the ground up that in a period of 8 years, it became the second largest city in Laos. And by 1969, it became one of probably the busiest airport in the world in terms of takeoff and landing. But Long Cheng does not exist on any map. Long Cheng was the common name for the local people. The Americans hardly used the term Long Cheng. At the beginning of Long Cheng was codenamed as, it was not codenamed, Long Cheng was known as Lima Site 30. In northern Laos, when the United States went in, they have to establish airstrip in the different outposts so that they can supply they can provide humanitarian supply and military supplies to the troops. So all of these different Lima airstrips in northern Laos are called Lima Site. Long Cheng was named Lima Site 30. Later on, when starting from a dirt strip, it was developed into a concrete strip where it was renamed to Lima Site 98. So Lima Site 98 was listed in the directory, but for the Americans, especially the pilot and the US government, they will call it alternate or 20 alternate. 20 meaning Lima Site 20, which is Samtong. Samtong was the USAID headquarters in Laos. So they call that Lima Site 20. When they want to go to Long Cheng, they would say, we want to go to alternate, so that anyone who the US government does not want to know about Long Cheng would not have a clue what alternate is. So that's how Long Cheng came about. And so Long Cheng was used as the CIA paramilitary headquarters. It was also home to General Vang Pao in the Hmong. And by 1969, Long Cheng hold a population of approximately 40,000 people. And by that was the peak of the Vietnam War. But again, with being the second largest city in Laos, being the busiest airport in the world with 40,000 people, it did not exist on any map. It only appeared on the military map, where there's a little note says Skyline Ridge, which indicating the highest mountain, the ridge alongside Long Cheng. But there's, again, its name does not appear on map. I like to explain a little bit about Long Cheng, clarification on Long Cheng. Commonly, now, contemporarily, people is familiar with Long Cheng being spelled Longcheng. That's what's the contemporary spelling. But the original spelling of Long Cheng was spelled Longtieng. It was pronounced, it's correctly pronounced Long Cheng, but the way how it was pronounced, spelled at that time was pronounced Long Cheng. So that's how the Secret War was fought. The Hmong, along with other minority groups, under the leadership of General Vang Pao, stood up against and fought against the communists. General Vang Pao was also the military commander of Military Region 2 of Laos. And so when Long Cheng was established, USAID was there. They need transportation, and so Air America, which is a contract airline to the CIA, then operates all of the supplying to northern Laos. So Air America was also housed at Long Cheng. And then later on, there's other smaller airlines such as Continental and Bird & Sun were also play a significant role in there. They need more support. Air powers are needed. And so that's why the Raven were incorporated into that program. My father was a major under General Vang Pao's secret army. Keep in mind, there's two different armies under General Vang Pao's wing. There's the military Region 2 commander, as he commanded. And then there was the secret army, or the special guerrilla unit. That's what they were known for, special guerrilla units under General Vang Pao as well. And the special guerrilla units, or SGU, were funded by the CIA to fight the war. And so what happened was, by 1973, the Paris Peace Treaty brought an end to the Vietnam War. Laos was treated as part of the Vietnam War, and so a coalition government was to incorporate and end the war in Laos. Unfortunately, in 1975, when South Vietnam fell, Cambodia also fell, and then Laos was next. What happened in Laos was, because the United States no longer have a role in Laos, they didn't have much manpower to be involved in Laos by 1975. So when the communists took over, the Hmong had a decision: either surrender to the communists, or resist the communists, or with the third option, leave, knowing that if they surrender, they'll be killed because they are the enemy. If they resist the communists, knowing the United States is not going to be there for them, they will run out of supply and they cannot resist, so they'll just be slaughtered as well. So the best option is to leave. But to leave, they cannot leave all at once. General Vang Pao seek out for the highest priority, and he asked the U.S. ambassador to Laos to evacuate 3,500 people, just his high-rank officers and their families, to Thailand for safety issues. But what happened was, when General Vang Pao left Laos, the Hmong, who were under his command, also left because they were being persecuted, including my family. My family did not catch the airlift, so we were left behind. They were only able to airlift about 2,800 people in a short period of 3 days. So they only got about 2,800 people out of Laos. The rest were basically abandoned. And my father was one of them. My family was stuck in Laos. I was born 2 years after the war, and then the communists seek out for my father for his services to the United States. So my father had to flee to the jungle, take my mother and I was just a couple months old, and we hid in the jungle for nearly 2 years before we escaped to Thailand. My personal experience, I don't recall any of these, but the stories from my mother and my relative who were part of the group that made that exodus out was, when we got to the Mekong River, they were concerned that the children will cry and alert either the communists on the Laos side or the Thai authorities on Thai side, especially the communists, because as soon we had to swim across the Mekong River. There was no boat waiting to take us over to Thailand. And the parents were concerned that as soon as they touched the water, the cold water, the children were going to cry, and they will alert the communist troops who were stationed along the river. And so they had to dope their children with opium to put them to sleep so that they can cross the river. I must say that my mother loves me. She didn't give me enough opium to put me to sleep. So as we crossed the river, we swam across the river into Thailand. Right when we arrived on the Thailand side, I woke up and started crying. And I alerted the Thai locals, who then came over, welcomed us to Thailand, took us to the road, to the side of the road, and then told what they did was, when we got to Thailand, They welcomed us to Thailand, told the men to surrender their weapon, and then took us to the side of the road and robbed us, took everything that we had, and left us there. And then the local village chief had been notified by the Thai government that if any Hmong refugees cross into Thailand, that they need to report to the detention center, and take those families to the detention center or to immigration. And so as my family then walked to the road and toured the village, that's when the local village chief was notified of our presence, and he reported to the immigration, and they took us to the refugee camp. So my earliest recollection were from the refugee camp. I always heard the story of the Vietnamese invaded our homeland, so we had to leave Laos to Thailand. I remember my mother would always send packet of mail back to Laos to my relatives. And I say, why can't they come over? I never understood the risk, the difficulty that they had. It took us to get to Thailand. And so my family spent 9 years in Thailand. By that time, I was 11 years old. Now, while in Thailand, the only American names or Americans that I heard of all the time were Pop Bill and Jerry Daniels. Those were the only two American names that I knew. And so later on, I learned when my father was put in charge of the humanitarian distribution program at the refugee camp, they put together a Hmong ritual. We call it the soul release ceremony for Pop Bill. And that's how I learned that Pop Bill passed away. Pop Bill was visiting my father about 3 weeks before he passed away. Pop Bill and Jerry Daniel stopped by my parents' house. Jerry Daniel issued a number to my father. What happened when the Hmong took refuge in Thailand was the U.S. government made a priority only to resettle those that work directly with the U.S. government, particularly those that work with the American. So those that work for USAID and those that work directly with the pilot, like the Ravens. My father was just a soldier, but he knew Jerry Daniels really well. And so when they filtered those individuals that work directly with the Americans, now they're seeking for the soldiers. And so Jerry Daniels stopped by the house to give my father that we call the TA number, the travel alien number. And Jerry Daniels get that piece of note with that number, and Jerry Daniels told my father that whenever you are ready to go to America, this will be your case number to go to America. My family could have left Thailand in 1979, but my father did not want to leave Thailand because his brothers and his parents were still stranded in Laos. He was the only one, along with one of his brothers, that made out of Laos. And he was hoping to reunite with them first, either go back to Laos and reunite with them, or wait for them to get to Thailand and then we all can come to America. So he didn't want to leave, and that's why Jerry Daniels stopped by the house to give him that TA number. Jerry Daniels and Pop Bill left the camp and Pop Bill went to the Philippines. And 3 weeks later, they found out that he passed away. So my family stayed in the refugee camp. My father was holding on to the hope to reunite with his family, and unfortunately that didn't happen. He had really a close relationship with the Thai Army and with some of the U.S. American workers there. And he was advised by the Thai army that refugees in Thailand was coming to a closure, and he had the choice. He could just leave and go to America, or he chose to stay in Thailand. The Thai government is willing to grant us Thai citizenship, promote him to a lieutenant in the Thai army, and move us out of the refugee camp into the Thai city. So with his relationship to the Americans, he spoke to one of the Americans who was a humanitarian doctor working there. His name is Dr. Jim. And so Dr. Jim advised my father that to take his 4 sons to America because they have a future ahead of him, for him to think of his children's future, not his. And so that's why he chose that decision to come to America. And so in 1988, in September 1988, my family departed the Vinai refugee camp into Pananikom in southern Thailand, and we stayed there as a transition camp for 5 months, and then we left Thailand to the United States, directly to California. So we were sponsored by my grandmother, who was already here in Northern California, and so we came straight to Northern California, and this is where I grew up, in Northern California. So this is a new country, new land, new language. It's a cultural shock to me. The best memory I had was when we were leaving San Francisco International Airport, coming toward I-80, toward the Bay Bridge, and I could see all these buildings along the hill. To me, that was fascinating. That was the very first scene of America that I saw. Never like that before in Thailand. And so that was the very first picture of America when I saw, when I think of America. I started school in the 4th grade. And in the community that we were settled in Oroville, it's a very small rural community. They didn't have a clue who the Hmong were. They thought we were Chinese. And there's just a lot of misconceptions that I went to school, people think I'm Chinese, I say, no, I'm Hmong. Where, Hmong, are you from Mongolia? No, I'm from Laos. They don't know what Laos is because Laos was never on American television, let's say. And so many of those that within my generation went through a lot of transition in this country. You're talking about growing up with being the first generation growing up in this country. We got picked on because of the misconception and misunderstanding, the lack of understanding at that time, that for the Hmong and other Southeast Asian kids that grew up in this country, that were refugee and grew up in this country, we got picked on by the Caucasian kids, the Latino, and the African American kids. Being that physically we're smaller and we get pushed around, the Asian mentality is, if you push me, you ask for it. I have every right to hit you back. In the American system, I can shove you around, but if you don't, whoever throw the first punch is at fault for blaming you to start the fight. That's a different interpretation to the Asian. And so a lot of issue rose up where there's a lot of fights. I never got in a fight, fortunately, but my peers got into a lot of fights. And as these conflicts continue to rise, the Hmong, knowing that they are small in size, they can't fight one-on-one against a larger Caucasian or Latino or African American kids. They team up fighting other people. And when they develop this shield of protection, it was really good in the beginning because they just stood up for each other to protect each other. But as that evolved, it leads to gang-related activity, and that's the misfortune of it. But it was like every society is a transition that we grew up in, and part of this melting pot society is every immigrant group that came to this country went through that transition. Hmong gang was very popular in the late 80s and particularly in the 90s, and then it slowly faded away. It still is a problem today, but it's not as big as it was in the 90s. We have been here for almost 40 years now, and it has been a big turning point, probably the greatest turning point for the Hmong people in its history, consider its 5,000 history. My father was always close to him, but I never got that opportunity. So in 2001, I started making myself visible and getting to know him and talk to him a little bit about the importance of our future, but the importance of our past as well. And finally came to 2005 when I probably convinced him before that. I've told him that it is very important that his legacy and our parents' legacy needs to be documented and preserved to educate our generation, our children in the future, and especially what he and his men did from 1961 to 1975 was a major part of the United States history that was not told, and that we need to document that. So finally in 2005, he agreed for the interview, and I started the interview with General Vang Pao. From General Vang Pao, I then started connecting with different American CIAs like Bill Lair. I finally met with Bill Lair, visited him in his Texas home, and spent the whole day with him, and then just start connecting the dots, and then finally the Raven came into the picture, and other Americans and other Air Force individuals. And then I ended up traveling all around the country, and then traveling to Thailand to talk to the Thai, knowing that the Thai play a significant part in that war, and they collected a lot of our history as well. So I went to Thailand to gather some of their stories and documentations, and look forward to, I initially wanted to do a documentary to educate the public and the Hmong, the young Hmong about our history. But as through the course of my research, I gathered a lot of materials, and I realized I can be finished with a documentary, but all these knowledge that I gather would just be put to waste if I don't do something with it. So that's why I come to the conclusion that I will put it into a professional presentation in a book and preserve that for the future generation of future researchers. And once I complete with my research and make it available, hopefully there will be an institution that preserve these history so that I can make my collection available for future researchers and educators to use. So that's my ultimate goal, is to, whatever I did initially was a personal interest, turn into a passion, and then now turn into a commitment to do something with it. So I'm very fortunate to learn that you are also doing something today and putting something into a professional and educational perspective to educate not just the Hmong, but educate the future Americans about our past, about the Hmong, why did the Hmong end up in America, and how did the Hmong came to America. Not just that, but what did the Hmong went through in America to be where we are today.